All right, curious minds and sleepy skeptics. Tonight we dive deep into history's biggest scams. Forget mere snake oil. We're talking audacious schemes that shook nations, emptied fortunes, and left victims stunned. From selling countries to pyramids of deceit, witness the sheer audacity of human deception. Perhaps feel a bit safer under your blanket. If this journey through grand deception captures you, gently like and subscribe. It aids our quiet expeditions into history's failures. Tell us in comments where you're listening from and your time. Now, dim lights. Pull blankets close. Let's ease into these great swindles. Welcome back, or perhaps welcome to, that quiet shared space between wakefulness and sleep. In our previous explorations, we hinted at the grand deceptions of history, but tonight we delve a little deeper, into a more intimate, perhaps unsettling question. Why do these cons, these elaborate illusions, actually work so effectively? What is it within the human spirit, across cultures and centuries, that makes us susceptible to the swindler's song? It's a question not of blame, but of understanding the very threads of our nature that, when pulled artfully, can unravel even the most cautious among us. Let us gently explore this enduring lure. One of the most primal threads, and perhaps the most commonly cited, is greed. Not always the monstrous, cackling avarice of caricatures, but often a more subtle yearning, the desire for a little more comfort, a quicker path to security, or a taste of a life perceived as better. Con artists are masters at painting visions of effortless abundance, of windfalls just within reach. They dangle the golden apple, and the simple human wish for a larger slice of fortune can sometimes cloud judgment, making the impossible seem suddenly tantalizingly possible. It's the dream of skipping the struggle, a dream as old as humanity itself. Then there is desperation, a powerful and poignant vulnerability. When faced with mounting debts, failing health, or the collapse of a familiar world, the rational mind can find itself overwhelmed. In such moments, a con artist's promise, no matter how outlandish, can appear as the only glimmer of light in a vast darkness. They offer not just a solution, but a rescue. The normal safeguards of skepticism are eroded by the urgent need for a lifeline, any lifeline. It's a heavy truth that those who have the least to lose are often preyed upon with the most devastating success, their last hopes exploited. Hope, that most resilient of human qualities, can also be a pathway for deception. We are creatures built to look forward, to believe in the possibility of better days, of healing, of breakthroughs. Scammers artfully weave their narratives into this inherent optimism. They might offer a miracle cure, an undiscovered investment secret, or a chance to be part of something revolutionary. This isn't always about a grand, unrealistic hope. Sometimes it's the quiet hope for a modest improvement, for a problem to simply go away. The con artist co-adopts this beautiful human trait, turning a beacon into a trap. And what of trust? Society itself is built upon a foundation of trust, in our neighbors, in institutions, in the inherent goodness of others, at least to a degree. Con artists are chameleons, adept at mirroring our expectations and creating an illusion of familiarity, authority, or shared values. They might feign a common background, invoke a reputable but false authority, or simply exude an irresistible charm. This manufactured trust bypasses our critical faculties. When this carefully constructed trust is shattered, the financial loss is often compounded by a deeper, more personal sense of betrayal, a wound to our faith in others. There's also the undeniable allure of something for nothing, or at least something substantial for very little. The prospect of an incredible bargain, an overlooked loophole, or an exclusive opportunity that promises disproportionate rewards for minimal effort or risk can be intensely seductive. It appeals to a part of us that enjoys a clever shortcut, a secret advantage. Scammers craft their tales to make us feel special, chosen for this unique chance. The little voice that whispers, "It sounds too good to be true," is often drowned out by the louder, more exciting promise of an effortless win, a victory against the odds. As we sift through these vulnerabilities, a striking realization emerges. These are not novel weaknesses exploited by modern tricksters. The tools may change, from handwritten letters to sophisticated websites, but the underlying psychology remains constant. The promises of ancient alchemists echo in the pitches of today's cryptocurrency scams. The snake oil salesmen of old have merely donned new costumes. History, in its often repetitive way, shows us that the same triggers, the same emotional levers, have been used for centuries, even millennia, to part people from their security. These patterns are deeply woven into the human story. So as we prepare to journey further into specific tales of grand deception, it's perhaps helpful and even a little comforting in a strange way to recognize these universal touch points. Understanding why we, as humans, are susceptible is not about judgment. It's about acknowledging the complexities of our own desires, fears, and hopes. These traits make us who we are, capable of great things, but also occasionally vulnerable to those who would exploit our very essence. Let these thoughts settle as we dim the lights further on the stage of history's deceptions. The enduring lure is, in essence, the lure of being human. Let us now drift back to the early 18th century, to the bustling, ambitious heart of Great Britain. The air was thick with the scent of new ventures and the quiet hum of an empire stretching its nascent financial wings. It was an era of innovation, but also one where fortunes could be made and lost with bewildering speed. Tonight, we turn our gaze to one of history's most infamous financial tempests, a cautionary tale whispered down the centuries, the South Sea Bubble of 1720. A story not just of money, but of dreams, deception, and the collective fever that can grip a nation when promised unimaginable wealth. The story begins, as many grand schemes do, with a kernel of seemingly sound intention. In 1711, the South Sea Company was established, the brainchild of Robert Harley, then Chancellor of the Exchequer. Britain was shouldering a significant national debt, largely a consequence of prolonged wars. The company was chartered with a dual purpose: to monopolize trade with the Spanish colonies in South America, the fabled South Seas, and crucially, to help manage and reduce this burdensome government debt. It sounded respectable, even patriotic, a venture to enrich both crown and country, or so it was presented. The South Seas themselves were a name that shimmered with exotic promise. For centuries, tales had circulated in Europe of the incredible wealth of South America, mountains of silver, rivers of gold. The South Sea Company, by securing exclusive trading rights, particularly the Asiento de Negros, which granted the right to supply African slaves to Spanish colonies, was positioned as the sole conduit to these legendary treasures. Promoters painted vivid pictures of ships laden with bullion, of profits beyond the wildest dreams of ordinary investors. The reality of this trade was far more complex and less lucrative, but perception was everything. At its core, the company's most ambitious plan involved a grand financial conversion. The government allowed holders of national debt, essentially government IOUs, to exchange their bonds for shares in the South Sea Company. For the government, it meant consolidating messy debts into a more manageable relationship with a single entity. For debt holders, it offered the tantalizing prospect of swapping fixed, often modest interest payments for a stake in a company whose profits, they were told, would be virtually limitless. This conversion was the engine that would drive the company's stock to dizzying heights. Initially, the company's stock performed modestly, but as the debt conversion schemes were rolled out, and as influential figures publicly endorsed the venture, a buzz began to build. Directors of the South Sea Company not uncoincidentally saw their personal fortunes swell as they actively promoted the stock, sometimes through less than transparent means. They understood that the value of the stock was becoming untethered from the actual and quite limited profits from its trading activities. Instead, it was fueled by expectation, by the ever-increasing belief in future riches. A slow spark was beginning to ignite. By the early months of 1720, that spark had roared into a wildfire of speculation. The price of South Sea stock began a meteoric ascent. In January, a share might have cost around £128 sterling, 0 pence. By March, it was £330 sterling, 0 pence. By May, it surged past £500 sterling, 0 pence. And by June, it was an astonishing £890 sterling, 0 pence, with some trades reportedly reaching £1,000 sterling, 0 pence. A kind of collective euphoria gripped London. The sober calculations of risk and reward were swept aside by the overwhelming desire to join the ascent, to catch the rising tide, no matter how precarious its foundations seemed to even the more cautious observers. This was not a frenzy confined to seasoned financiers or the wealthy elite. The lure of instant riches proved irresistible to people from all walks of life. Aristocrats and politicians mortgaged their estates, merchants risked their businesses, and even domestic servants and laborers were said to have pooled their meager savings to buy shares or fractions of shares. Coffee houses and exchange alleys buzzed with tips and rumors, each new tale of instant wealth fanning the flames higher. It was a societal phenomenon, a shared dream of effortless prosperity that transcended class and caution. The speculative mania was heavily lubricated by a constant stream of rumors, half-truths, and outright fabrications regarding the company's prospects. Vague announcements of new trade deals, exaggerated accounts of resource discoveries in South America, and whispers of royal endorsements kept hopes artificially inflated. The actual details of the company's trading voyages and their profitability were shrouded in convenient obscurity. In an era without stringent financial regulation or immediate access to verified information, investors were largely operating on faith and the infectious optimism of those around them. The astonishing success of the South Sea stock inspired a wave of imitators. Hundreds of new joint stock companies dubbed bubble companies sprang up almost overnight. Many proposed ventures of the most ludicrous and improbable nature for businesses like importing walnut trees from Virginia, or, most famously, a company for carrying on an undertaking of great advantage, but nobody to know what it is. These operations, often with no real assets or viable business plans, siphoned yet more capital into the speculative vortex, further destabilizing an already overheated financial environment. Alarmed by the proliferation of these often fraudulent bubble companies which threatened to divert funds from its own stock, the South Sea Company itself pushed for regulatory action. This led to the passing of the Bubble Act in June 1720, which aimed to restrict the formation of new joint stock companies without a royal charter. Ironically, while intended to solidify its own position, this act may have inadvertently pricked the wider speculative mania by making investors more critical. Nevertheless, South Sea stock briefly reached its zenith around this time, a precarious peak before the inevitable fall. As the summer of 1720 wore on, the first discernible cracks began to appear in the magnificent facade of the South Sea bubble. Some astute, or perhaps just nervous, investors, including a few company insiders, quietly began to sell their shares and lock in their extraordinary profits. Whispers of doubt started to circulate. Where were the vast shipments of gold and silver from South America? The company's actual trading income remained pitifully small compared to the astronomical valuation of its stock. The foundations of belief, so crucial to the bubble, started to tremble ever so slightly. The descent, when it began in late August, was swift and brutal. As more people tried to liquidate their holdings, the stock price began to slide. This initial dip triggered a wave of panic. Those who had bought on credit or with borrowed money were suddenly faced with ruinous margin calls. The psychology of the crowd, which had driven prices to irrational heights, now worked in reverse, creating a stampede for the exits. By September, the stock was in freefall. The illusion shattered, revealing the stark, empty reality beneath the glittering promises. The great South Sea dream had become a waking nightmare. The bursting of the South Sea bubble brought financial devastation on an unprecedented scale for the time. Thousands of families, from the wealthiest echelons of society to those of modest means, were ruined. Fortunes built over generations vanished in weeks. Prominent figures, including scientists like Sir Isaac Newton, who famously lamented, "I can calculate the motion of heavenly bodies, but not the madness of people," suffered significant losses. Bankruptcies became commonplace, and the economic shockwaves rippled through the entire British economy, stalling commerce and breeding deep distrust. Public fury was immense. The cry for scapegoats was loud and sustained. A parliamentary inquiry was launched, unearthing evidence of corruption, bribery, and insider dealing among the company directors and even prominent politicians. Several directors had their estates confiscated. The Chancellor of the Exchequer involved in the scheme was imprisoned in the Tower of London. While the government, under Robert Walpole's astute management, managed to stabilize the financial system and restore a degree of public credit, the scandal left deep scars on the nation's psyche for many years. The South Sea bubble stands as a stark early monument to the perils of unchecked speculation and the infectious nature of crowd psychology in financial markets. It demonstrated how easily hope and greed, amplified by misinformation, can detach asset prices from any underlying reality. Yet, as history would repeatedly demonstrate in the centuries that followed, from Dutch tulips to Wall Street crashes and dot-com booms, the lessons of such bubbles are often forgotten in the intoxicating heat of the next grand illusion. The patterns of human behavior, it seems, are remarkably resilient to even the harshest of financial lessons. And so, the story of the South Sea Company, which promised a shortcut to untold riches from distant shores, fades back into the annals of history. It serves as a quiet reminder, as you drift further into your rest, of how dreams of effortless wealth can build into towering, shimmering bubbles, only to inevitably return to earth, leaving behind a landscape of quiet ruin and hard-won wisdom. The echoes of 1720 murmur a timeless truth about the enduring dance between human aspiration and the sobering touch of reality. Sleep now as these old follies settle into the dust of time. As the echoes of the Great War finally faded, America in the early 1920s hummed with a vibrant, almost restless energy. It was an age of jazz, of burgeoning cities, and for many, a renewed, fervent pursuit of prosperity and the American dream. Yet beneath this optimistic surface, the timeless vulnerabilities of human hope and perhaps a little greed remained. It is in this dynamic era that we find a man whose name would become forever synonymous with a particular insidious form of financial deceit, a name that still whispers a clear warning today: Ponzi. Tonight we quietly explore the tale of Charles Ponzi and the scheme that, quite literally, bears his infamous name. Carlo Pietro Giovanni Guglielmo Tibaldo Ponzi, later universally known as Charles Ponzi, arrived in America from Italy in 1903 with, by most contemporary accounts, little more than a few dollars in his pocket and an abundance of persuasive charm. He was a man of modest physical stature but possessed an oversized ambition and a confident, almost hypnotic demeanor. For several lean years he drifted through various jobs and indeed a few minor scrapes with the law, always seemingly searching for that one grand opportunity, the singular masterstroke that would catapult him to the riches and societal recognition he so deeply craved. His early American years were a fascinating prelude to his audacious main act. The seed of his notorious scheme, or at least its plausible public facade, was planted by a seemingly innocuous everyday item, an international reply coupon, or IRC. These small coupons could be purchased in one country and then exchanged for postage stamps in another, facilitating international mail correspondence. Due to sharply fluctuating currency exchange rates and differing postal costs in the chaotic aftermath of the war, Ponzi claimed he had discovered a clever way to buy IRCs cheaply in certain struggling European countries and redeem them for a much higher intrinsic value in the United States. This arbitrage, he confidently asserted, could yield truly substantial profits, a hidden financial loophole just waiting to be exploited by a keen eye. Armed with this concept of arbitrage, Ponzi began to solicit investments. He didn't just promise good returns, he promised astonishingly, almost unbelievably high profits. Investors were told they could see a 50% return on their money in just 45 days, or even a 100% return in 90 days. In a time when typical bank interest was around 5% a year, such figures were elected. It was a siren song of quick, effortless wealth, an offer that for many proved too tempting to meticulously scrutinize or outright resist. To manage this burgeoning enterprise, Charles Ponzi established the Securities Exchange Company in Boston in late 1919. Its beginnings were modest, operating initially out of a small office. The company issued promissory notes to investors, detailing their investment and the spectacular return they could expect in a short period. The legitimacy of the IRC arbitrage was presented as the solid foundation upon which these incredible profits would be built. Few questioned the logistics or the sheer scale of IRC transactions that would be required to sustain such payouts. The true genius of Ponzi's scheme, however, lay not in any complex international coupon trading, which was impractical on the scale he operated, if it occurred much at all. Instead, the mechanism was deceptively simple and as old as trickery itself. He used the money flowing in from new investors to pay the promised returns to earlier investors. As long as new money kept arriving in increasing amounts, the illusion of a profitable enterprise could be maintained. Early investors received their payouts, became walking advertisements for the scheme, and the cycle continued, drawing in ever more hopeful participants. In the initial months, Ponzi's scheme worked like a charm, precisely because he made sure it did for the first wave of investors. Those who put their money in early and cashed out after 45 or 90 days received their promised windfalls. Word spread like wildfire. Here was a financial wizard, a man who had unlocked a secret to easy riches. Ponzi himself cultivated this image, exuding confidence and generosity. He became a local hero to many, a symbol of immigrant success and financial acumen, his reputation growing with every purported payout. By the spring and summer of 1920, the trickle of investors had become a torrent. A full-blown mania gripped Boston and then spread further afield. Thousands of people, from working-class laborers to police officers, from seasoned businessmen to recent immigrants, flocked to Ponzi's offices. Lines snaked around the block, people clutching their life savings, mortgaging their homes or borrowing heavily, all desperate to hand their money to the man promising such miraculous returns. The atmosphere was one of heady excitement and unshakable belief in imminent fortune. As money poured in at an astonishing rate, Charles Ponzi began to live the life of a millionaire. He purchased a lavish mansion in Lexington, Massachusetts, complete with a custom-built swimming pool. He owned expensive cars, dressed in the finest clothes, and was known for his extravagant spending and generous tips. This ostentatious display of wealth, rather than raising suspicion among most of his investors, actually served to reinforce their faith. To them, it was visible proof of his financial genius and the success of his incredible investment opportunity. The sheer scale of Ponzi's operation in its heyday was breathtaking. At its peak in the summer of 1920, money was reportedly flowing into his company at a rate of hundreds of thousands of dollars a day, an enormous sum for the time. It's estimated that tens of thousands of people entrusted their money to him, investing amounts that collectively ran into the millions. The logistics of merely handling the cash and the paperwork became a significant undertaking, yet the public's appetite for Ponzi's notes seemed insatiable, driven by the fear of missing out on a golden chance. However, such an extraordinary phenomenon could not escape scrutiny indefinitely. Financial experts began to publicly question the feasibility of generating such high returns through IRC arbitrage, pointing out that the sheer volume of coupons required would be logistically impossible to handle. The Boston Post newspaper, in particular, launched an investigative series into Ponzi's business, raising uncomfortable questions about the source of the funds used for payouts. Ponzi, ever confident, initially dismissed these concerns as the ramblings of jealous doubters. Faced with mounting public skepticism and press investigations, Ponzi employed his considerable charm and audacity to try and maintain investor confidence. He gave interviews, projecting an image of calm reassurance and unwavering success. He even invited scrutiny, offering to open his books to auditors, though any such examinations were carefully managed or superficial. For a time, these tactics worked. Many loyal investors rallied to his defense, viewing him as a persecuted visionary rather than a potential fraudster. His charisma was a powerful shield. But the foundation of a Ponzi scheme is inherently unstable. It requires an ever-increasing supply of new money. Once that flow falters, the entire structure is doomed. Negative publicity, coupled with a state-ordered audit that revealed the alarming truth of his insolvency, that he had far more liabilities than assets, finally pricked the bubble. In August 1920, panic set in. A run on the securities exchange company began as desperate investors scrambled to withdraw their money. But the coffers were by then largely empty of real profits, containing only the dwindling deposits of later arrivals. The collapse was swift and devastating. Thousands of investors, many of whom had poured their entire life savings into Ponzi's dream, were left destitute. Their paper fortunes vanished overnight. The public adulation Charles Ponzi had enjoyed turned into bitter recrimination. He was arrested in August 1920, and the ensuing legal battles revealed the full extent of his deception. Though the IRCs had provided the initial pretext, the vast majority of the money had simply been shuffled between investors. The wizard was exposed as a mere trickster. Charles Ponzi was eventually convicted on multiple counts of mail fraud and spent many years in prison. While he certainly didn't invent the concept of robbing Peter to pay Paul, his scheme was so audacious, so widespread, and so publicly spectacular in its rise and fall that his name became indelibly attached to this particular type of financial fraud. Ever since, any investment swindle that pays early investors with money from later ones while claiming profits from a fictitious business has been dubbed a Ponzi scheme. It's a dubious honor for a name now synonymous with deceit. And so, the tale of Charles Ponzi serves as another quiet, cautionary chapter in our journey through history's grand deceptions. It reminds us, as the night deepens, of the powerful allure of get-rich-quick promises and the ease with which human hope, combined with a touch of greed and a willingness to believe, can be exploited. Ponzi's true genius lay not in financial strategy, but in his understanding of these enduring human frailties. Now let these thoughts of ambition and illusion gently fade as you drift further into your sleep. Perhaps a little wiser to the echoes of schemes past, let our minds drift slowly back to the mid-19th century, a period of great industrial ferment and restless global exploration. The world was hungry for new resources, new fuels to power its burgeoning factories and light its rapidly growing cities. Tonight we delve into a story from this dynamic era that is less about what was found and more about how its discovery was meticulously packaged and sold to an eager public. It's a tale of rock oil, a curious man named Kier, and a colonel whose title, much like the narrative of his famous find, might have been more constructed than earned, a story that some might call a barrel of lies, leading to a torrent of black gold. Our journey into this oily saga begins not with a famous colonel, but with a Pennsylvania businessman named Samuel M. Kier. In the 1840s, Kier's salt wells near Pittsburgh were becoming annoyingly contaminated with a dark, smelly, and persistent substance, petroleum, or rock oil as it was commonly known. Initially a troublesome nuisance, the ever-enterprising Kier saw an opportunity. He began bottling this seepage, marketing it with considerable gusto as Kier's Petroleum, or rock oil, a patent medicine, a supposed cure-all for ailments ranging from blindness to burns. His marketing was tinged with the era's typical medicinal hyperbole and flair. Kier's medicinal rock oil, sold in distinctly shaped bottles, achieved a degree of local fame, though its healing properties were, shall we say, questionable. However, the story of rock oil was about to take a significant turn. As Kier and others experimented with the substance, they found it could be refined into a fairly effective aluminum kerosene. This was a pivotal realization. Whale oil, the primary fuel for lamps at the time, was becoming increasingly expensive and scarce. A cheaper, more abundant alternative like kerosene from rock oil had immense potential, if only it could be reliably sourced. The main challenge was the supply. Collecting oil from natural seepages, or as a byproduct from salt wells, as Kier largely did, was inefficient and insufficient to fuel a burgeoning illumination market. What was needed was a method to extract this rock oil directly from the earth in larger, more predictable quantities. The question hanging in the air was no longer about the oil's potential uses, which were becoming clearer, but about how to unlock its subterranean reservoirs. This challenge set the stage for a new group of entrepreneurs with a more ambitious vision. Enter George Bissell, a New York lawyer, and his business partner, Jonathan Eveleth. In the early 1850s, Bissell became intrigued by the potential of rock oil after seeing a sample, possibly even one of Kier's medicine bottles. He recognized its illuminating properties could be far more valuable than its medicinal ones. Bissell and Eveleth formed the Pennsylvania Rock Oil Company, one of the first petroleum companies in America. Their aim was clear: to find a way to drill for oil, much like one might drill for water or salt, and to commercialize it on a grand scale. They needed capital and a believable plan. To spearhead their drilling operations in the oil-rich regions of northwestern Pennsylvania, specifically near Titusville, the Pennsylvania Rock Oil Company, later reorganized as the Seneca Oil Company, hired a man named Edwin Drake in 1857. Drake was a former railroad conductor with no geological or drilling expertise. To give their venture an air of authority and credibility, especially to potential local partners and investors, Bissell and his associates began addressing Drake in correspondence as Colonel Edwin Drake. The title was entirely fabricated, a deliberate embellishment for their man on the ground. Colonel Drake arrived in Titusville in 1858, tasked with a mission that many locals openly ridiculed as Drake's folly. Drilling for oil was an unproven concept. He faced numerous setbacks: hard rock, collapsing well shafts, equipment failures, and dwindling funds from his backers, who themselves were growing anxious. The local drillers he tried to hire were skeptical and often unreliable. Yet Drake, perhaps buoyed by the manufactured confidence of his title or simply driven by the instructions and dwindling resources from his employers, persisted through months of frustrating and laborious effort. Then, on the afternoon of August 27, 1859, after many months of slow, painstaking drilling, at a depth of just 61.5 feet, Drake's well finally struck oil. It wasn't a dramatic gusher initially, but crude oil began to accumulate in the borehole. The next day, Drake and his driller, William Uncle Billy Smith, pumped it out by the barrelful. This moment, the successful culmination of the first well deliberately drilled to find oil, was immediately framed as a monumental, pioneering breakthrough by visionary Colonel Drake. The news of Colonel Drake's oil strike at Titusville spread like wildfire. It was precisely the kind of dramatic success story that the Seneca Oil Company and its investors had hoped for. The event was heavily publicized, portrayed as the triumphant result of Drake's singular vision and perseverance. This carefully managed narrative was crucial. It aimed to ignite public imagination, attract widespread investment not just in their company but in the entire prospect of oil drilling, and trigger the rush for black gold that would quickly follow, transforming the region. The false pretense or scam aspect, as described in our concept, wasn't that the oil wasn't real or that drilling technology was entirely faked. The oil was very real, its potential immense, and its extraction method, while adapted from salt well drilling, was indeed being applied to oil for the first time in such a focused, intentional way. The deception lay in the carefully manufactured persona of Colonel Drake as the inspired, independent, heroic discoverer, and the deliberate hyping of this specific moment as the singular discovery of oil's potential, obscuring the calculated business venture and significant financial motivations that meticulously orchestrated the entire event, primarily to create an investable, booming industry. Adding a crucial layer of legitimacy to the burgeoning oil venture was the earlier work of Professor Benjamin Silliman Jr. of Yale University. In 1855, George Bissell had commissioned Silliman to analyze the properties of rock oil. Silliman's detailed and very positive report confirmed its value as an illuminant and lubricant, effectively giving scientific endorsement to petroleum's potential. This report was widely circulated by the Pennsylvania Rock Oil Company to attract investors. While Silliman's science was genuine, its use became part of the broader promotional effort to make oil an attractive, credible investment. The impact of Drake's well, or more accurately, the news of it, was immediate and transformative. An unprecedented oil rush began. In western Pennsylvania, Titusville and surrounding areas became boomtowns overnight. Fortune seekers poured in, land prices soared, and new drilling operations sprang up with astonishing speed. The landscape was soon dotted with derricks, and the quiet creeks ran black with oil. An entirely new industry, with all its attendant chaos and opportunity, was born almost instantaneously from this carefully publicized event. And what of Samuel Kier, the early purveyor of medicinal rock oil? While he had recognized some of petroleum's wider uses and even attempted some refining, his operations remained relatively small-scale. The Drake well, backed by organized capital and a deliberate publicity strategy, catapulted oil into a different league. Kier's early efforts were more those of an opportunistic, small businessman dealing with a curious local resource. The con, perhaps, in his case, was limited to the exaggerated medicinal claims, a common practice of the era, rather than a grand deception about the resource itself. So, was it truly a barrel of lies? The oil itself was undeniably real and its value immense. The innovation of drilling specifically for it was a genuine step forward. However, the narrative woven around Colonel Drake's heroic individual discovery was certainly a carefully constructed exaggeration, a promotional tool designed to ignite investor interest and create a market. The lies were perhaps more of embellishment and strategic omission, the fabricated military title, the downplaying of the corporate engineering of the event, all to craft a more compelling and investable founding myth for a new industry. Despite the deceptive elements in its promotion and the fabricated aspects of its hero's persona, the event at Titusville in August 1859 is historically recognized as the birth of the modern petroleum industry. It unlocked a vast new energy resource that would profoundly shape the 20th century and beyond, fueling machines, lighting homes, and creating immense fortunes. The story of Drake's well serves as a complex example of how progress, promotion, and perhaps a degree of calculated myth-making can intertwine at the genesis of transformative industries. As the quiet of the night envelops you, consider this tale of rock oil, false kernels, and the birth of an empire of black gold. It's a reminder that even the most solid industries can have foundations laced with carefully crafted narratives, where the line between visionary promotion and subtle deception can sometimes blur. The story of Drake's folly, or Drake's triumph, depending on your view, is now a firm part of our dense, slumber-inducing history. Let the clatter of the drill and the scent of oil fade far away as you drift peacefully into deep sleep, carried on these currents of the past. Welcome, weary traveler of the waking world. Settle in, let your eyelids grow heavy, and allow us to transport you to a time of peculiar hardship and even more peculiar schemes. Tonight we journey to the sunburnt plains of Australia, not for its celebrated natural wonders nor its tales of bushranger bravery, but for a story whispered in the margins of history. A scam born from fetters, frustration, and the fumes of financial desperation. Our tale unfolds in the 1930s, a period when the world was gripped by the Great Depression, and Australia, like so many others, was on its knees. But this was also a land that had recently played host to one of military history's most unconventional conflicts, the Great Emu War. Now, the Emu War itself is a story for another sleepy night, perhaps. Suffice it to say, in 1932, the mighty Australian military, armed with machine guns, was deployed to Western Australia to combat a plague of emus devastating farmland. The emus, with their erratic movements and surprising resilience, largely outmaneuvered the soldiers. It was, to put it mildly, an embarrassing spectacle, a David and Goliath story where Goliath tripped over his own feet and the Davids were large flightless birds with an uncanny ability to dodge bullets. The newspapers had a field day, and the government, well, they were less than amused. The air was thick with agricultural woes and the lingering scent of gunpowder and national bewilderment. It is against this backdrop of very real, very serious economic hardship and the rather surreal memory of a failed avian war that our particular scam takes flight. Imagine the scene. Farmers, many of them returned servicemen from the Great War, were already struggling. They'd been promised prosperity, a patch of earth to call their own, a chance to build a future. Instead, they faced drought, plummeting wheat prices, and fields overrun by feathered marauders who seemed to mock their every effort. The government, in their eyes, had tried and failed to protect their livelihoods from these emus. Hope was a scarce commodity, rarer than a well-aimed shot in the aforementioned war. And where hope dwindles, dear listeners, opportunism often blooms. Con artists, those ever-present vultures circling the desperate, are never far behind. They possess a keen sense for the vulnerabilities of the human spirit, a knack for weaving tales that prey on the thinnest slivers of optimism. In the wake of the Emu War, with its blend of genuine crisis and utter absurdity, A new, particularly audacious idea began to percolate in the minds of certain unscrupulous individuals, an idea that, if successful, would be a testament to the old adage, "There's a sucker born every minute," especially when they're already down on their luck. Whispers began to circulate, carried on the same winds that once scattered emu feathers across the outback, tales of a new initiative, a secret weapon in the ongoing, albeit officially concluded, battle against the emu menace. These weren't tales of more soldiers or bigger guns. No, this was a financial strategy, a way for the common man, the struggling farmer, the worried townsfolk to not only contribute to the definitive end of the emu scourge, but also to profit from the inevitable glorious victory. A victory, mind you, that the military had already, well, not quite, achieved. Enter the magnificent, the entirely fictitious emu war bonds. Yes, you heard that correctly. Bonds. Financial instruments, usually the domain of governments funding wars against, shall we say, more conventional enemies. But these were different. These were special. These, the slick-tongued promoters purred, were a chance to invest in the final solution to the emu problem, a problem that had, after all, directly impacted the nation's agricultural heartland. The bonds, they claimed, were backed by the anticipated spoils of this renewed and this time successful campaign. The genius of the scam, if one can call it that, lay in its sheer audacity and its clever exploitation of recent events. The Emu War was fresh in everyone's memory. The devastation caused by the birds was an ongoing reality for many. The government's previous efforts had been a public relations disaster, creating a space for an alternative, a seemingly more grassroots and potentially more profitable solution. The con artists painted vivid pictures of a future where emu crop damage was a thing of the past, where the land flourished, and where early investors in these unique bonds reaped handsome rewards. They might have spoken of new, secret government strategies, perhaps too sensitive to be publicly announced, strategies that these bonds were funding. They might have hinted at advanced emu deterrent technologies, or perhaps even a more culinary solution to the emu surplus, with profits from emu meat and feathers guaranteed to make bondholders rich. The specific promises likely varied from one shyster to the next, each tailoring their pitch to the particular anxieties and aspirations of their audience. The key was the blend of patriotism, problem-solving, and personal profit. Imagine a dusty town hall or a dimly lit back room in a country pub. A charismatic figure, perhaps dressed in a slightly too sharp suit for these lean times, stands before a small gathering of hopeful faces. He speaks with passion, with conviction, his voice resonating with understanding for their plight and a firm belief in this golden opportunity. He'd unroll impressive-looking, though entirely worthless, bond certificates adorned with official-looking crests, likely of his own design, and perhaps even a noble, if slightly comical depiction of a vanquished emu. The desperation of the Great Depression cannot be overstated. People had lost their savings, their jobs, their farms. They were looking for any lifeline, any glimmer of hope in the overwhelming darkness. The promise of turning a small, precious sum into a much larger one, especially by contributing to a cause that felt, however bizarrely, like a national priority, would have been incredibly tempting. The Emu War bonds offered not just a financial return, but a return to a sense of control, a way to fight back against the forces both economic and avian that seemed determined to crush them. Of course, there was no new Emu War, there was no secret government fund, there were no advanced emu processing factories about to spring into existence. There was only the con artists, the worthless paper, and the dwindling savings of those who fell for the ruse. The money invested in these Emu War bonds vanished as quickly as a startled emu into the bush, lining the pockets of the scammers who would soon move on to the next town, the next desperate community, the next outlandish scheme. The exact scale of this scam is lost to the mists of time, a footnote in an era of widespread hardship. It was likely a series of smaller, localized cons rather than a grand, coordinated effort. Records of such ephemeral frauds are, by their nature, scarce. Victims were often too embarrassed or too powerless to report their losses, especially when the authorities were already overwhelmed with more conventional crimes and the pressing needs of a populace on the brink. It was a scam that thrived in the shadows, preying on the isolated and the ill-informed. Yet the legend of the Emu War bonds persists, a curious little eddy in the vast ocean of historical scams. It's a story that captures the unique flavor of the time and place, the resourcefulness, the absurdity, the profound economic pain, and the strange, almost mythical status of the Emu War itself. It highlights how easily misinformation and false hope can take root when people are vulnerable, and how the echoes of a peculiar event can be twisted into an instrument of deception. It speaks to a certain down-under ingenuity, albeit a criminally misapplied one, to look at a failed military operation against a horde of flightless birds and see not a national embarrassment, but a financial opportunity. That takes a special kind of crooked creativity. The scammers weren't just selling bonds, they were selling a narrative, a story where the little guy could finally win, where even the bizarre failures of the past could be alchemized into future profits. The sheer whimsy of the concept, investing in a war against emus, likely helped it bypass the rational scrutiny of some. It was so outlandish, so uniquely Australian, that it almost felt plausible in a strange way. After all, if the government could officially declare war on birds, why couldn't private citizens invest in the mop-up operation? The line between reality had already been blurred by the original emu war itself. And so, as the sun set on another day of the Great Depression, as families gathered around their meager meals, some would have clutched their freshly purchased emu war bonds, their hearts a little lighter, their hopes a little brighter. They dreamt of dividends, of security, of a day when the great emu threat was no more and their foresight would be rewarded. It was a dream, of course, built on a foundation of lies, a whimsical, desperate deception in a wacky, desperate time. The only ones who truly profited were those who understood that sometimes the most unbelievable stories are the easiest to sell to people longing for something, anything, to believe in. Welcome, seekers of slumber. Let the day's concerns drift away as we journey back to a time of ambitious dreams and audacious deceptions, to the rugged, hopeful expanse of the American West in the latter half of the 19th century. Tonight we unearth a tale not of cowboys and gunfights, but of a sparkle that promised unimaginable wealth, a story of cunning trickery that ensnared some of the nation's sharpest minds and deepest pockets. Settle in, breathe deeply, and let us explore the glittering illusion known as the Diamond Hoax of 1872. Our story begins not in a grand city boardroom, but in the dusty, hopeful landscapes where fortunes were sought and sometimes meticulously fabricated. The protagonists of this elaborate charade were two cousins, Philip Arnold and John Slack. These weren't hardened criminals in the usual sense, but rather opportunistic prospectors, men who understood the feverish desire for instant riches that permeated the era of westward expansion. They had witnessed the gold rushes, seen how the mere whisper of precious minerals could ignite a frenzy, and an idea far more valuable than any they might legitimately find began to crystallize. In 1871, Arnold and Slack drifted into San Francisco, carrying with them a modest pouch. It wasn't gold they purported to have found, nor silver, but something far more exotic and, at the time, almost mythical in the American West: diamonds. They hinted at a secret location, a field strewn with these precious gems, somewhere in the remote, uncharted territories. Their initial displays were cautious, just enough to pique the interest of local speculators and businessmen, men always eager for the next big strike. They were weathered, wore the guise of simple frontiersmen, and their story, though extraordinary, tapped into the era's boundless optimism. The initial investors, intrigued by the rough uncut stones Arnold and Slack produced, provided funds for a second expedition. This, of course, was all part of the plan. The cousins journeyed to London and Amsterdam not to discover more diamonds, but to purchase them, low-quality, industrial-grade stones mixed with a few rubies, sapphires, and emeralds for good measure, costing them perhaps around $20,000. These were the very treasures they would later discover in the American wilderness, the bait for a much larger catch. Their initial investment in deception was a calculated risk. Upon their return to the United States, Arnold and Slack, now with a more substantial collection of gems, began to escalate their scheme. They needed to convince not just hopeful speculators, but men of significant wealth and influence. They allowed themselves to be followed to a remote, desolate plateau in northwestern Colorado, near the Wyoming border. Here, with theatrical reluctance, they revealed their diamond field. Unbeknownst to their eager observers, they had meticulously salted the area, scattering their purchased stones across the landscape, pushing them into crevices, and even placing them in anthills to simulate natural discovery. The news spread like wildfire. The idea of an American diamond mine rivaling those of South Africa or India was intoxicating. It promised national prestige and, more importantly to many, colossal personal fortunes. Respected businessmen and financiers in San Francisco formed a consortium, raising significant capital to invest. They dispatched their own mining engineer, Henry Janin, a man of supposedly impeccable reputation, to verify the find. This was a critical juncture for Arnold and Slack. If Janin saw through their ruse, the game was up. Janin, however, perhaps blinded by the glittering prospect or simply outwitted, declared the field authentic and incredibly rich. His report, filled with glowing estimates of the diamond yield, sent waves of excitement across the nation. The validation from a respected expert was the seal of approval the scammers needed. Suddenly, the biggest names in American finance and society were clamoring for a piece of the action. The newly formed San Francisco and New York Mining and Commercial Company was capitalized at an astonishing $10 million, a monumental sum for the 1,870. Among those drawn into the glittering web were figures like Horace Greeley, the famed newspaper editor and former presidential candidate, and even Charles Tiffany, founder of the iconic Tiffany & Co. These were not foolish men, but they were men of their time, caught in the speculative mania that often accompanied westward expansion and the promise of untapped resources. The allure of diamonds, coupled with Janen's endorsement, proved irresistible. Fortunes were poured into the venture, and Arnold and Slack were handsomely paid for their discovery, receiving around $600,000, a king's ransom. They had played their parts perfectly, the rugged, unassuming prospectors who had stumbled upon a miracle. They largely faded into the background as the titans of industry took over, planning large-scale mining operations, envisioning railroads to the remote site, and dreaming of the gems that would soon flood the market. The press, fueled by Janen's report and the involvement of prominent figures, trumpeted the discovery as one of the most significant in American history. The nation was gripped by diamond fever, all thanks to a carefully seeded patch of desolate land. However, not everyone was convinced. Doubts began to surface among geologists who understood the typical geological formations where diamonds are found. The Colorado site seemed unlikely. One man, in particular, would prove instrumental in unraveling the deception: Clarence King. King was a highly respected geologist leading the U.S. geological exploration of the 40th parallel. The reported location of the diamond field fell within his survey area, and the sensational claims piqued his professional curiosity and perhaps his skepticism. In the autumn of 1872, King and his team undertook their own discreet expedition to the supposed diamond field. Unlike Janen, they were not there at the invitation of the company or with the discoverers as their guides. They approached the site with scientific rigor and a critical eye. What they found, or rather didn't find, was telling. The diamonds were there, scattered about as reported, but their distribution was unnatural. They were found in loose soil, on exposed surfaces, and in places inconsistent with geological processes of diamond formation. King and his team noticed that only certain types of gems were present, corresponding to those known to be sold cheaply in London. More damningly, they found stones that showed evidence of lapidary work, facets and cuts that could only have been made by human hands, not by nature. They found a diamond resting neatly atop a rock, another placed conspicuously beside an anthill, clearly not a natural occurrence. The evidence mounted this was no natural wonder, but an elaborate man-made fraud. The field had been expertly, painstakingly salted. King rushed back to San Francisco to expose the hoax, understanding the immense financial implications and the damage to public trust. In November 1872, his findings were made public. The news hit like a bombshell. The $10 million company collapsed overnight. Fortunes were lost, reputations were shattered, and the investing public was left reeling from the audacity of the deception. The great American diamond dream had dissolved into dust and deceit. Philip Arnold, the primary architect of the scam, had already secured his considerable profits and returned to his native Kentucky, where he became a banker. While he faced lawsuits, he managed to retain a significant portion of his ill-gotten gains, though his life ended in a violent dispute years later, unrelated to the diamond hoax. John Slack, the quieter partner, largely disappeared from the historical record, his share of the spoils and his ultimate fate less certain. He faded back into the obscurity from which he had briefly and fraudulently emerged. The diamond hoax of 1872 served as a harsh lesson in skepticism and due diligence. It highlighted the dangers of speculative fever and the ease with which even sophisticated investors could be duped by a well-crafted illusion. Clarence King emerged as a national hero, his meticulous scientific investigation saving countless others from financial ruin and reaffirming the importance of empirical evidence over sensational claims. His exposure of the fraud was a triumph for American science. The affair left an indelible mark on the era. While the investors nursed their losses and the public processed the shock, the story became a cautionary tale, a dramatic example of how the thirst for wealth could cloud judgment. The remote Colorado Plateau, once envisioned as a bustling center of a new diamond industry, reverted to its previous quiet desolation, its brief, glittering fame a mere footnote in the annals of elaborate scams. The sparkle had been nothing more than a carefully polished lie. And so, as you drift deeper into your rest, remember Philip Arnold and John Slack and their field of phantom diamonds, a reminder that not all that glitters is gold, or in this case, diamond. Sometimes it is merely the reflection of human ingenuity, twisted towards deception. creating a brief, dazzling, and ultimately hollow spectacle in the grand, often dull theater of history. Let the quiet truth of its unraveling soothe you into a peaceful sleep. Welcome, weary listeners, to another journey into the quiet corridors of the past. Let the sounds of your day recede, and allow your mind to drift as we explore a tale of astonishing audacity, a story where an entire nation was conjured from thin air and sold to the hopeful and the unwary. Tonight, we unfurl the curious case of Gregor McGregor and his phantom paradise, the fictional Republic of Poyais. Settle into comfort and let the gentle cadence of this extraordinary deception lull you towards rest. Our story centers on a figure as enigmatic as the land he invented, Gregor McGregor, born in Scotland in 1786. He was a soldier, an adventurer, a man possessed of boundless ambition and a remarkable talent for self-promotion. After serving in the British Army and participating in the Venezuelan War of Independence, McGregor returned to Britain in the early 1820s with a tale far grander than any military exploit. He declared himself the cacique or prince of Poyais, a purported sovereign state on the Mosquito Coast of Central America, a land he claimed was bestowed upon him by the indigenous King George Frederick Augustus of the Mosquito Shore. McGregor was a masterful showman. He didn't just speak of Poyais, he brought it to life with an astonishing attention to detail. He established legations or embassies for Poyais in London, Edinburgh, and Glasgow. He designed a vibrant Poyaisian flag featuring a green cross on a white and blue background and even had Poyaisian currency printed, elaborate dollar notes that were, of course, utterly worthless. He was, in essence, building a nation on paper, a carefully constructed illusion designed to ensnare the imaginations and the finances of a hopeful European populace. His descriptions of Poyais were nothing short of utopian. He painted it as a land of incredible fertility, with rich soil capable of yielding multiple harvests a year. Its rivers, he claimed, teemed with fish and even nuggets of gold. The forests were filled with valuable timber, and the climate was supposedly idyllic, free from tropical diseases. He spoke of a bustling capital city, St. Joseph, complete with a grand opera house, a cathedral, parliamentary buildings, and elegant villas. He even produced a detailed Poyaisian constitution and a book, ostensibly written by A. Thomas Strangeways, extolling the virtues and investment opportunities of this undiscovered paradise. The Britain of the 1820s was ripe for such a deception. The Napoleonic Wars had ended, leaving many soldiers unemployed and a general public eager for new investment opportunities and fresh starts. South America was seen as a land of exotic promise and revolutionary fervor. McGregor, with his military credentials and his confident aristocratic bearing, fit perfectly into the role of a pioneering leader, offering a gateway to this new world. He was charming, persuasive, and his story was incredibly detailed, lending it an air of irrefutable authenticity. He opened offices to sell Poyaisian land certificates and government bonds. Prices for land were attractive, and the promised returns on investment were substantial. Hundreds of people, from skilled artisans and farmers to retired army officers and aspiring gentlefolk, eagerly poured their savings into McGregor's scheme. They weren't just investing money, they were investing their dreams, their hopes for a better life in a land of milk and honey. Many decided to emigrate, selling their homes and possessions to finance their journey to this promised land. The first ship, the Honduras Packet, set sail from London in September 1822, carrying around 70 eager settlers bound for Poyais. They were filled with optimism, clutching their land deeds and Poyaisian dollars, envisioning the thriving colony described by their charismatic cacique. A second ship, the Kennersley Castle, departed from Leith, Scotland in early 1823 with nearly 200 more emigrants. Their hearts were full of hope, their minds painted with the vibrant pictures McGregor had so skillfully rendered. The reality that greeted these hopeful pioneers was a brutal, heartbreaking betrayal. When the Honduras Packet arrived at the supposed location of Poyais, near the Black River in modern-day Honduras, the settlers found no bustling capital, no cultivated fields, no welcoming infrastructure. Instead, they were met by a desolate, swampy jungle, thick with mosquitoes and disease, and largely uninhabited save for a few indigenous people who had no knowledge of any Prince Gregor or the grand nation he had described. The settlers were stranded, their Poyaisian currency useless, their land deeds meaningless pieces of paper. The provisions they brought were inadequate for the harsh environment. Disease, particularly malaria and yellow fever, began to take its toll. Starvation loomed. The dream of Poyais had dissolved into a horrifying nightmare. The lush paradise they had been promised was, in fact, a malarial death trap. The opera house and cathedral were phantoms of a con man's imagination. When the Kennersley Castle arrived a few months later, its passengers found the first group of settlers in a desperate state, many already dead or dying. Disbelief turned to despair as they too confronted the grim reality of McGregor's elaborate lie. The survivors, with the help of a rescue mission eventually dispatched from Belize, were eventually evacuated, but not before a significant number had perished. Out of the approximately 270 settlers who had sailed for Poyais with such high hopes, it's estimated that fewer than 50 ultimately survived the ordeal. News of the disaster slowly filtered back to Britain, creating a scandal. McGregor, however, proved to be as slippery as he was deceitful. By the time the full extent of the tragedy became known, he had already moved his operations to France, attempting to replicate his Poyasian scam with fresh, unsuspecting victims. He managed to convince another group of French investors and potential settlers, though this venture was largely thwarted before it could lead to a similar catastrophe, thanks to swifter intervention by authorities alerted to his previous activities. Despite the immense suffering and financial ruin he caused, Gregor McGregor largely evaded severe justice for the Poyais scheme. He was arrested in France but managed to talk his way out of significant punishment, claiming he too was a victim of circumstance or misinformation from his agents. He eventually returned to Scotland, and then, remarkably, made his way back to Venezuela, where he had served years earlier. There, leveraging his past military service, he managed to integrate himself back into society, and he was, by all accounts, a con-man of extraordinary talent and resilience. His ability to weave a compelling narrative, to create an illusion so detailed and believable that it fooled hundreds, even thousands, marks him as one of history's most audacious fraudsters. The Poyais scheme was not just a financial scam. It was a wholesale fabrication of a country, complete with all its trappings designed to exploit the deepest human desires for prosperity and a fresh start. The tragedy of Poyais lies not just in the money lost, but in the lives destroyed and the hopes so cruelly extinguished. The victims were not necessarily foolish. They were people of their time, caught in a wave of speculative enthusiasm and seduced by a charismatic figure who promised them the world, or at least a very desirable piece of it. McGregor's audacity was matched only by his indifference to the human cost of his deceptions. The tale of Gregor McGregor and the Republic of Poyais serves as a chilling reminder of the power of a convincing lie, especially when it taps into prevailing aspirations and societal vulnerabilities. It highlights the meticulous planning and elaborate stagecraft that can go into large-scale deceptions. The sheer scale of his invention, a whole country complete with its own governmental structure and economy, is what sets this scam apart. Even as McGregor eventually faded into a somewhat comfortable, if controversial, retirement in Venezuela, dying in Caracas in 1845, the ghosts of Poyais lingered. He was granted a general's pension and a state funeral there, a bizarre end for a man who had caused so much misery elsewhere. The memory of the settlers who perished in the Central American jungle, their dreams turned to dust, stands as a stark testament to his monstrous deceit. And so, as the story of Poyais fades into the quiet of your room, let it be a gentle reminder of the strange and sometimes dark paths down which human ambition can lead. A tale of a phantom nation, a testament to the incredible power of fabrication. Now consigned to the soft echoes of dull history, perfect for guiding you into a deep and untroubled sleep. Welcome, gentle listeners, to another quiet exploration of history's more peculiar deceptions. As the world outside settles into stillness, let us drift back to the vibrant, yet uncertain, Paris of the thousands, 920s. Tonight we recount the tale of a con artist so audacious, so daring, that he managed to sell one of the world's most iconic landmarks, not once, but twice. Settle in, breathe easily, and let the astonishing story of Victor Lustig and his infamous sale of the Eiffel Tower guide you towards slumber. Our protagonist, Victor Lustig, was a man of many talents, though none of them were particularly legal. Born in Austria-Hungary, he was a charismatic and intelligent individual, fluent in several languages and possessed an uncanny ability to read people, their desires, their weaknesses, and their greed. He styled himself as a count, a title as fabricated as the schemes he masterminded. By the 1920s, Lustig had a long and varied career as a con artist, operating on transatlantic liners and in the bustling cities of Europe and America, always seeking the next grand deception. The stage for his most legendary con was Paris in 1925. The city was recovering from the Great War, a place of artistic ferment and economic rebuilding. The Eiffel Tower, initially built for the 1889 World's Fair, had by this time become a familiar part of the Parisian skyline, but it was also expensive to maintain. It was this very real financial burden that provided the seed for Lustig's incredibly bold idea. He read a small newspaper article discussing the public debate about the tower's upkeep, and a spark of larcenous genius ignited. Lustig decided he would sell the Eiffel Tower for scrap metal. To achieve this, he first needed to establish a credible persona. He meticulously forged official-looking government stationery and credentials, appointing himself as the Deputy Director General of the Ministry of Posts and Telegraphs. This fabricated position gave him the apparent authority to deal with sensitive state matters, such as the discreet disposal of a massive iron structure that was supposedly becoming a financial drain on the city. His attention to detail was paramount. His next step was to identify his potential victims. He secretly invited a small, select group of Parisian scrap metal dealers to a confidential meeting at the prestigious Hôtel de Crillon, one of Paris's oldest and most luxurious hotels. The opulence of the venue was carefully chosen to lend an air of legitimacy and importance to the proceedings. The dealers, intrigued and sensing a potentially lucrative government contract, duly attended, unaware they were walking into an elaborately set trap. Lustig, exuding an air of quiet authority and official importance, explained to the assembled dealers that the French government had made a secret decision. The Eiffel Tower was to be dismantled. He spoke of soaring maintenance costs, engineering concerns, and the public outcry that would ensue if the decision were made public prematurely. Therefore, he stressed, the entire affair must be handled with the utmost discretion. He implied, entrusting them with a state secret of immense significance and a very profitable opportunity. He painted a picture of a massive undertaking, 7,300 tons of high-quality iron, a prize for any scrap dealer. He took the dealers on a tour of the tower, not an official one, but one where his presence and official-looking documents quelled any immediate suspicion. He gauged their reactions, their eagerness, their levels of greed and gullibility. He was not just selling metal, he was selling a story, an illusion of a once-in-a-lifetime deal, shrouded in the necessary secrecy that would prevent them from making too many external inquiries. Among the dealers, Lustig identified his most promising mark, André Poisson. Poisson was somewhat new to the Parisian business scene and was eager to establish himself, to make a name within the inner circles. He was ambitious and perhaps a little insecure, qualities Lustig expertly exploited. Poisson was enthusiastic, but his wife was more suspicious. She wondered why such a significant government deal was being conducted so secretively and handled by this one official. Lustig, sensing Poisson's lingering hesitation and his wife's doubts, played his next card masterfully. He arranged a subsequent private meeting with Poisson and subtly hinted that his own government salary was modest and that such lucrative contracts often involved certain unspoken considerations to ensure a smooth process. He wasn't crude enough to demand a bribe directly, but the implication was clear. For Poisson, this was the missing piece that made the puzzle click into place. A corrupt government official. That, paradoxically, made the secret deal seem more believable in the cynical post-war era. Poisson, reassured by this apparent, if illicit, normality, paid Lustig a substantial bribe to secure the winning bid, in addition to the agreed-upon purchase price for the Eiffel Tower's scrap. Once the funds were transferred, Victor Lustig didn't waste a moment. He took the money and a train straight to Vienna, leaving André Poisson with a worthless contract and the dawning, horrifying realization that he had been spectacularly duped. The sheer embarrassment of being conned into buying the Eiffel Tower was so profound that Poisson chose not to report the crime to the police. He feared ridicule and ruin within the business community. This, Lustig had counted on. The shame of the victim was often the con artist's best protection, allowing them to melt away and prepare for their next endeavor, without the authorities on their trail. Lustig lay low for a while, enjoying his considerable profits. But the audacity of the scam and its incredible success was apparently too tempting for Lustig to resist repeating. A few months later, with the story having not made public waves due to Poisson's silence, Lustig returned to Paris. Incredibly, he decided to try the exact same con again. He once more gathered a new group of scrap metal dealers using the same forged documents, the same story of the tower's impending demolition, and the same air of official secrecy. This time, however, his luck was not quite as good. He managed to sell the tower to another dealer and collect the payment, but before he could make a clean getaway as he had with Poisson, this second victim, perhaps less concerned with shame or quicker to realize the deception, went to the police. The alarm was raised, and newspapers finally got wind of this extraordinary tale, printing sensational stories about the man who sold the Eiffel Tower. Lustig, however, was already a step ahead. He managed to evade capture by the French authorities and fled to the United States. There he continued his criminal career, engaging in various counterfeiting operations and other scams. He became such a notorious figure that he was eventually pursued by the U.S. Secret Service for his counterfeiting activities, which were considered a major threat to the economy. His long run as a master con artist eventually came to an end. In 1935, Victor Lustig was arrested by federal agents in New York after an extensive investigation into a large-scale counterfeiting ring. He was tried, convicted, and sentenced to 20 years in the infamous Alcatraz Federal Penitentiary in San Francisco Bay. The man who had sold France's iconic landmark found his freedom curtailed by the very real bars of America's most secure prison. Victor Lustig died in prison in 1947 from complications of pneumonia. He left behind a legacy as one of the most ingenious and daring con artists of the 20th century. The Eiffel Tower scam remains his masterpiece, a testament to his supreme confidence, his meticulous planning, and his profound understanding of human psychology. He didn't just exploit greed, he exploited bureaucracy, secrecy, and the desire for insider knowledge. The story of Victor Lustig and the Eiffel Tower serves as a remarkable, almost unbelievable chapter in the annals of grand deceptions. It's a tale that highlights the incredible lengths to which a con artist will go, and the surprising ease with which even a national monument can become a prop in their elaborate plays. It reminds us that sometimes the most unbelievable stories are the ones that captivate and deceive most effectively, especially when presented with an air of unshakable confidence. And so, as the image of the steadfast Eiffel Tower stands tall in your mind, let the audacious tale of its phantom sails drift away, a curious footnote in history. May the boldness of the scheme and the quiet justice of its end bring a sense of closure, guiding you into a calm and peaceful sleep, far from the reach of such grand illusions. Welcome, seekers of repose, to another quiet delve into the annals of extraordinary deception. As the day's clamor subsides, let your mind gently float back to the swinging 1960s, a time of great change and, for one young man, unparalleled opportunity for audacious impersonation. Tonight, we unravel the almost unbelievable story of Frank Abagnale Jr., a teenage prodigy of fraud who donned multiple identities with astonishing ease. Settle into your comfort, let your breathing deepen, and allow this tale of cunning and charisma to guide you toward peaceful slumber. Our subject is Frank William Abagnale Jr., whose escapades began when he was just a teenager. Born in 1948, his foray into deception started with petty check fraud aimed at his own father, but soon blossomed into a series of elaborate cons that would make him one of the most famous imposters of the 20th century. Before he was even legally an adult in many places, Frank was living a life most could only imagine, financed entirely by his wit and his remarkable ability to inspire trust where none was warranted. His first grand impersonation was that of an airline pilot. At the mere age of 16, realizing the authority and access a pilot's uniform commanded, Frank cleverly obtained a Pan American World Airways uniform. He forged a pilot's license and FAA identification card, learning enough about the airline industry by simply talking to actual pilots and staff. He discovered he could deadhead, hitch free rides on flights by presenting his fake credentials. It's estimated he flew over 1 million miles on more than 250 flights, traveling to 26 countries, all while Pan Am believed he was one of their own. The allure of the uniform and the perceived glamour of being a pilot opened many doors, and Frank exploited this to the fullest. He not only traveled for free, but also cashed a multitude of fraudulent Pan Am payroll checks across various cities. He learned to manipulate bank deposit slips, overstating his deposits and withdrawing the fictional excess before the checks bounced or the forgeries were discovered. His youth and confident demeanor often disarmed tellers and bank officials who were reluctant to question a seemingly distinguished Pan Am first officer. When the Pan Am ruse began to feel risky, as authorities started to close in, Abagnale didn't simply retire his wings. He sought a new, equally respectable, and perhaps less mobile disguise. He relocated to Georgia and for nearly a year successfully posed as a pediatrician. Under the alias Dr. Frank Connors, he became a resident supervisor at a local hospital. How did he manage this with no medical training? He largely relied on interns to handle actual medical emergencies, using his charm and fabricated authority to delegate tasks and avoid direct patient care that might expose his ignorance. The pressures of potentially making life-or-death decisions, however, eventually led him to abandon his medical career. His next transformation was into the legal profession. He forged a Harvard Law School transcript, passed the Louisiana bar exam reportedly after several genuine attempts and much dedicated study of the law, and secured a job with the Louisiana Attorney General's office. For several months, Frank Abagnale Jr., a young man barely out of his teens, worked as a qualified attorney, bringing coffee for his boss and doing research, all while his real identity remained a carefully guarded secret. His legal career, like his medical one, was ultimately short-lived. The constant fear of exposure, or perhaps a genuine encounter with a fellow Harvard alumnus who began asking probing questions, prompted another swift change of scenery and profession. His chameleon-like ability to adapt and reinvent himself was truly remarkable. He seemed to thrive on the challenge, on the thrill of seamlessly integrating into new environments and professions that required years of dedicated study and experience. Beyond these major impersonations, Abagnale also claimed to have worked as a college sociology professor at Brigham Young University for a semester, teaching classes under yet another assumed name and with forged credentials. He reportedly read one chapter ahead of his students, managing to stay just knowledgeable enough to maintain the facade. Each persona was carefully constructed, supported by his keen observational skills, his talent for forgery, and an unshakable self-confidence that disarmed suspicion. A significant part of his illicit income came from sophisticated check fraud. He was not just a simple forger, he was an innovator in the field. He meticulously studied the banking system, learning its vulnerabilities. He printed his own almost perfect replicas of checks, sometimes using the magnetic ink encoding that was just beginning to be widely adopted, making his forgeries harder to detect. He would change routing numbers, knowing it would send the checks on a long journey through the banking system, buying him precious time. He was known to use various charming tactics to gain information, such as posing as a journalist or a student writing a paper on banking security, to learn the ins and outs of check processing and printing from the very institutions he planned to defraud. He understood that confidence and a plausible story were often more effective than the most technically perfect forgery. He knew how to make people want to believe him, to trust the well-dressed, articulate young professional he appeared to be. For 5 years, from the age of 16 to 21, Frank Abagnale Jr. lived this extraordinary life, on the run, constantly reinventing himself, always one step ahead of the law. He cashed an estimated $2,500,000, 0 cents, in fraudulent checks, in numerous countries, a staggering sum for the 1,960s. His exploits became legendary, a thrilling cat-and-mouse game played out across continents. He was pursued by law enforcement agencies worldwide, including the FBI. His eventual capture came in Montpellier, France in 1969, when an Air France attendant he had previously dated recognized him and alerted the police. He was just 21 years old. He subsequently served time in French, Swedish, and U.S. prisons. The conditions in the French prison at Perpignan were particularly harsh and had a profound impact on him. His youth, however, combined with the non-violent nature of his crimes, perhaps played a role in his sentences. After serving less than 5 years of a U.S. federal sentence, he was paroled on the condition that he assist the federal government in investigating and educating on matters of fraud, forgery, and security. This marked another remarkable transformation, from master con artist to respected security consultant. He went on to establish Abagnale & Associates, advising corporations and financial institutions on fraud prevention. The story of Frank Abagnale Jr. is a captivating look at the audacity of youth and the vulnerabilities of systems built on trust. He exploited the deference given to uniforms and titles, the complexities of burgeoning bureaucracies, and the simple human tendency to believe what is presented confidently. His tale highlights how a single, determined individual with sharp intellect and a lack of scruples could navigate and manipulate established societal structures with remarkable ease. His escapades, famously chronicled in his autobiography Catch Me If You Can, which later became a major motion picture, have cemented his place in the folklore of famous fraudsters. While some details of his accounts have been questioned or found to be embellished over the years, the core of his story, that of a young man who successfully lived multiple fabricated lives and defrauded institutions of millions, remains a fascinating study in deception. It is a reminder that appearances can indeed be deceiving, and that the most convincing illusions are often built not on elaborate props, but on a deep understanding of human psychology and the courage, or perhaps recklessness, to exploit it. He didn't just break rules, he rewrote them to suit his own daring narrative, for a time at least. And so, as the narrative of Frank Abagnale Jr.'s youthful whirlwind of deception draws to a close, let the sheer audacity and cleverness of his cons gently fade into the background. May the thought of such a restless, inventive mind finding an eventual, more conventional path bring a sense of resolution, easing you into a deep and untroubled sleep, secure in the knowledge that most people, thankfully, choose far less dramatic paths. Welcome, weary travelers, on the path to slumber. Let the gentle cadence of our story guide you away from the day's concerns and into a realm of quiet contemplation. Tonight, we turn our gaze to a more recent chapter in the long manuscript of Grand Deceptions, a tale from the polished corridors of high finance, where trust was meticulously cultivated and then devastatingly betrayed. Settle in, breathe deeply, and let us explore the quiet horror of the Bernie Madoff Ponzi scheme. Bernard Bernie Madoff was for decades a name synonymous with financial wizardry and steady, reliable returns. Born in Queens, New York in 1938, he founded Bernard L. Madoff Investment Securities in 1960. His firm grew into one of the largest market makers on Wall Street, and Madoff himself cultivated an image of an elder statesman of finance, exuding confidence, exclusivity, and unparalleled expertise. He was a former chairman of the Nasdaq Stock Exchange, a figure deeply embedded in the financial establishment. The allure of Madoff's investment advisory arm was its promise of consistent, if not spectacular, gains year after year, regardless of market volatility. Clients, who often gained access through an exclusive network of friends, family, and business associates, entrusted him with their fortunes, their retirement funds, and the endowments of their charitable foundations. They believed they were investing with a genius, someone who had a unique proprietary strategy, often vaguely described as a split-strike conversion strategy, that generated these remarkably stable profits. But behind this facade of unwavering success and financial acumen lay a deception of breathtaking scale and simplicity, a classic Ponzi scheme, albeit one of unprecedented magnitude and duration. For decades, Madoff wasn't actually investing his clients' money in any meaningful way to generate the returns he reported. Instead, he was using the principal from new investors to pay the purported profits to earlier investors, and of course to fund his own lavish lifestyle and that of his family. The illusion was maintained through meticulously fabricated account statements. These documents, sent out regularly, showed steady growth, creating a comforting sense of security for his thousands of clients. Trades were listed that never actually occurred. The consistency itself should perhaps have been a warning sign in the often turbulent world of finance. But Madoff's reputation, his air of quiet authority, and the social proof of so many other apparently satisfied, wealthy investors lulled many into a state of unquestioning belief. His scheme was a closed loop shrouded in secrecy and exclusivity. Gaining access to Madoff's investment arm was often seen as a privilege, a mark of being in the know. This exclusivity discouraged too many probing questions. If one questioned the methods too deeply, they risked being denied access to these coveted steady returns. It was a masterful manipulation of social dynamics and the desire for financial security and status. The returns weren't astronomically high, which ironically made them seem more believable, more sustainable. For many years, this house of cards stood firm. As long as new money flowed in at a sufficient rate to cover the withdrawals of existing clients and the phantom profits being reported, the scheme could continue. Madoff's legitimate market-making business, a separate and real operation, provided a veneer of respectability and a plausible source for his supposed financial expertise, further deflecting suspicion from his fraudulent advisory activity. He operated this massive fraud almost in plain sight within the heart of the global financial system. Regulatory bodies like the Securities and Exchange Commission, SEC, received tips and complaints about Madoff's operations over the years, notably from financial analyst Harry Markopolos, who repeatedly and with detailed evidence argued that Madoff's returns were mathematically impossible through legitimate trading. However, multiple SEC investigations failed to uncover the massive fraud. Madoff, the consummate insider, seemingly knew how to navigate these inquiries, providing plausible, if ultimately false, explanations and documentation. The quiet horror began to unravel in late 2008. The global financial crisis was in full swing, markets were tumbling, and liquidity was drying up. Madoff's clients, like investors everywhere, grew nervous. The requests for withdrawals began to increase significantly, reaching a volume that the inflow of new money could no longer sustain. The lifeblood of any Ponzi scheme, a constant stream of fresh capital, was choked off by the broader economic panic. Faced with redemption requests totaling billions of dollars that he simply did not have, the carefully constructed facade began to crumble. In December 2008, Madoff confessed the truth to his sons, Mark and Andrew, who worked in the legitimate trading arm of his firm, separate from the fraudulent advisory business. He told them that his investment advisory business was one big lie and had been insolvent for years. His sons, horrified, reported their father to federal authorities. On December 11, 2008, Bernie Madoff was arrested. The news sent shockwaves through the financial world and beyond. The man who had been a pillar of Wall Street, trusted by thousands, was revealed to be the architect of potentially the largest financial fraud in history. The paper wealth he had reported for his clients, estimated in the tens of billions of dollars, simply did not exist. The actual net losses to investors were eventually calculated to be around $18 billion, 0 cents of principal. The fallout was devastating and deeply personal for his victims. Lifelong savings were wiped out, retirements were shattered, charitable foundations, including those supporting medical research, education, and religious organizations, were bankrupted, their missions crippled. Many victims were elderly, having entrusted their entire nest eggs to Madoff, believing their financial futures were secure. This sense of betrayal was profound, not just of money but of trust placed in a man and a system. The quiet horror lay in the realization of how long this deception had persisted, how many lives it had touched and ruined, and how deeply it had been embedded within a system supposedly built on regulation and oversight. It was a stark reminder that even the most respected figures and institutions could be susceptible to, or perpetrators of, monumental fraud. The sophisticated veneer had hidden a remarkably simple, age-old con. Madoff pleaded guilty to 11 federal felonies, including securities fraud, wire fraud, mail fraud, money laundering, and perjury. He admitted that he had been operating the Ponzi scheme since at least the early 1990s, though investigators believe it may have started even earlier. He was sentenced to 150 years in prison, the maximum possible sentence, ensuring he would spend the rest of his life behind bars. He offered no real explanation or remorse that satisfied his victims. The Madoff scandal led to widespread outrage, calls for regulatory reform, and intense scrutiny of the financial industry. It exposed significant failures in oversight and highlighted the dangers of placing blind faith in individuals, no matter how impeccable their reputation might seem. The recovery of assets for victims became a long and complex process, managed by a court-appointed trustee, with only a portion of the lost principal eventually being returned. The story of Bernie Madoff is a somber tale of trust meticulously built and catastrophically broken. It's a reminder that even in the most modern and seemingly sophisticated financial landscapes, the oldest forms of deception can thrive, often hidden behind a veil of complexity and exclusivity. The quiet consistency he offered was the bait, and the quiet horror of its collapse was the inevitable consequence. And so, as you let this account of profound financial betrayal settle, allow the peace of your surroundings to envelop you. The world of high finance, with its intricate schemes, fades into the distance. May the quiet resolution of justice, however incomplete for some, and the lessons learned bring a sense of closure, guiding you toward a deep and undisturbed rest. Welcome, seekers of tranquility, to another quiet exploration of ambition and illusion. As the night deepens, let us journey to the sun-drenched optimism of Silicon Valley in the early 21st century, a place where dreams of changing the world often meet vast sums of capital. Tonight, we gently unfold the story of Theranos and its charismatic founder, Elizabeth Holmes, a tale of revolutionary promises and a reality that fell dramatically short. Settle in, let your thoughts soften, and allow this narrative of high-tech hope and hidden truths to guide you toward rest. Our story begins with a compelling vision. Elizabeth Holmes, a Stanford University dropout, founded Theranos in 2003 at the remarkably young age of 19. Her ambition was nothing short of audacious: to revolutionize healthcare by making comprehensive blood testing fast, inexpensive, and accessible to everyone, all from a tiny finger-prick sample of blood. She envisioned a world where individuals could monitor their health with unprecedented ease, potentially detecting diseases like cancer and diabetes in their earliest, most treatable stages. Holmes herself cultivated a striking and distinct persona, often seen wearing a black turtleneck reminiscent of Apple later Steve Jobs. She spoke with a deep, deliberate voice, projecting an image of intense focus and unwavering conviction. She presented Theranos not merely as a company, but as a mission, a profound quest to democratize healthcare. This powerful narrative, combined with her youth and apparent brilliance, captivated many influential people and the broader public imagination. The centerpiece of Theranos' promised revolution was a proprietary blood testing device, eventually named the Edison. This machine, Holmes claimed, could perform a vast array of tests, from cholesterol checks to complex genetic analyses, using just a single, tiny drop of blood obtained via a near-painless fingerstick. This was a radical departure from traditional blood testing, which typically requires vials of blood drawn intravenously and processed in large, centralized laboratories. The convenience and minimal invasiveness were key selling points. With this compelling vision and the promise of groundbreaking technology, Theranos attracted enormous investment. Holmes proved to be an incredibly persuasive fundraiser, securing hundreds of millions of dollars from high-profitable investors, including venture capitalists, media moguls, and prominent political figures. The company's board of directors became a veritable who's who of elder statesmen, including former secretaries of state, senators, and high-ranking military officials, lending an air of unimpeachable credibility to the enterprise. Theranos began to forge partnerships with major retail chains such as Walgreens and Safeway, with plans to roll out wellness centers where consumers could easily access these revolutionary blood tests. The company's valuation soared at its peak, reaching an estimated $9 billion, making Elizabeth Holmes, on paper, the world's youngest self-made female billionaire. She graced the covers of magazines, was lauded as a visionary, and became a symbol of Silicon Valley innovation and disruption. However, behind the carefully managed public image and the glowing media portrayals, a very different reality was unfolding within the secretive walls of Theranos. The Edison device, the cornerstone of the company's claims, consistently failed to perform as promised. It was plagued by inaccuracies, reliability issues, and an inability to conduct the wide range of tests touted. The revolutionary technology simply did not work, or at least not to the extent that was publicly represented. To conceal these profound technological shortcomings, Theranos allegedly resorted to a variety of deceptive practices. It was reported that the company often used commercially available traditional blood testing machines from other manufacturers to run tests on the samples collected instead of its own proprietary Edison devices. When the Edison machines were used, their results were often unreliable, and protocols were sometimes manipulated to hide these failures. There was an intense culture of secrecy and intimidation within the company that discouraged employees from speaking out. The first significant cracks in the Theranos facade began to appear in late 2015, thanks to the tenacious investigative journalism of John Carreyrou of the Wall Street Journal. Spurred by tips from skeptical medical experts and concerned former Theranos employees who had become whistleblowers, Carreyrou began to publish a series of articles questioning the company's technology and its testing practices. These articles meticulously detailed the inaccuracies of the Edison devices and the deceptive methods used by the company. Despite aggressive denials and legal threats from Theranos and Holmes, Carreyrou's reporting opened the floodgates. Regulatory bodies including the Food and Drug Administration, FDA, and the Centers for Medicare and Medicaid Services, CMS, launched their own investigations. These inquiries corroborated many of the issues raised in the articles, finding significant deficiencies in Theranos' laboratories and placing sanctions on the company, including banning Holmes from operating a blood testing lab for 2 years. The once bright star of Elizabeth Holmes and Theranos began to fall, and rapidly. Lawsuits from investors and partners mounted. Walgreens terminated its agreement, and the company was forced to void or correct years of blood test results, impacting potentially thousands of patients who had relied on them for medical decisions. The carefully constructed image of a revolutionary healthcare company began to unravel, revealing a complex web of ambitions, secrecy, and alleged fraud. The allure of disruption, so potent in Silicon Valley, had played a significant role in Theranos' rise. Investors and supporters were eager to believe in a young, charismatic founder who promised to overturn an established industry with groundbreaking technology. The fear of missing out on the next big thing perhaps led some to overlook potential red flags or to accept claims with insufficient scrutiny. Holmes' narrative was perfectly tailored to this environment. In 2018, the Securities and Exchange Commission charged Theranos, Elizabeth Holmes, and former company president Ramesh Sunny Balwani with orchestrating an elaborate years-long fraud. Holmes settled with the SEC, agreeing to a hefty fine and a ban from serving as an officer or director of a public company for 10 years, without admitting or denying the allegations. Theranos, once a multi-billion-dollar unicorn, effectively ceased operations and dissolved later that year. But the story didn't end there. In June 2018, Holmes and Balwani were indicted by a federal grand jury on multiple counts of wire fraud and conspiracy to commit wire fraud, relating to their alleged deception of investors and patients. Their trials, though delayed by various factors including the pandemic, eventually brought further details of the internal workings and deceptions at Theranos into the public domain. The quiet confidence Holmes once projected was now scrutinized under the harsh glare of legal proceedings. Elizabeth Holmes was ultimately found guilty on several counts of defrauding investors in January 2022 and was later sentenced to more than 11 years in federal prison. Sunny Balwani was also convicted in a separate trial on multiple fraud counts and received a sentence of nearly 13 years. The verdicts marked a stunning downfall for figures once celebrated as pioneers. The Theranos saga serves as a sobering cautionary tale for the worlds of tech, healthcare, and investment. It underscores the critical importance of due diligence, the dangers of a fake-it-till-you-make-it culture when human health is at stake, and the courage of whistleblowers who risk their careers to expose wrongdoing. It is a story of ambition that soared too close to the sun, fueled by a compelling narrative that ultimately could not withstand the weight of reality. And so, as the details of this Silicon Valley deception gently fade, let the quiet knowledge of its unraveling bring a sense of closure. May the lessons of ambition, truth, and the ultimate accountability that, even in the most complex of worlds, can prevail offer a soothing backdrop to your journey into deep and peaceful sleep. Welcome, weary seekers of slumber, to another quiet exploration of human folly and cunning. As the world outside grows still, let us drift into the surprisingly persistent realm of a scam known by many names, yet instantly recognizable: the advance fee fraud, most famously embodied by the Nigerian prince. Tonight, we'll gently uncover its long history, its psychological mechanics, and why this seemingly obvious deception continues to find its victims in our modern, interconnected world. Settle in, breathe deeply, and let this tale of digital deception guide you toward rest. The premise is likely familiar to anyone who has navigated the digital landscape for any length of time. An unsolicited email, perhaps riddled with grammatical errors and an air of desperate urgency, lands in your inbox. It purports to be from a person of significance, a prince, a government official, the widow of a wealthy tycoon, often, though not exclusively, claiming a connection to Nigeria or another distant land. They speak of a vast fortune, millions of dollars, trapped by some unfortunate circumstance, a political upheaval, a frozen bank account, a complex inheritance battle. The sender, your supposed benefactor, needs your help. A modest sum, an advance fee is required to unlock this immense wealth. This fee might be for legal costs, taxes, bank transfer charges, or even a bribe for a corrupt official. In return for your assistance, you are promised a substantial share of the trapped millions. It's a tantalizing offer, a small investment for a life-changing reward. This, in essence, is the advance fee fraud, often referred to as a 419 scam after the relevant section of the Nigerian criminal code. While the Nigerian prince iteration gained global notoriety with the rise of the internet and email, the fundamental structure of this confidence trick is far from new. Its lineage can be traced back centuries to schemes like the Spanish prisoner con, popular as far back as the 16th century. In that earlier version, a con artist would contact a wealthy individual claiming to be or to represent a person of high standing imprisoned in Spain under a false name, privy to a hidden treasure or fortune. A sum of money was needed to secure their release or access the riches, with the promise of a greater reward for the helpful victim. The psychological underpinnings of why these scams work, despite their often crude presentation, are fascinatingly complex. Greed is, of course, a primary driver. The allure of a massive, easily obtained fortune can cloud judgment, causing individuals to overlook obvious red flags. The promised sums are often so large that even a sliver of belief in their possibility can feel intoxicating, overriding rational thought with visions of instant wealth and a life free from financial worry. But it's not solely about greed. Scammers often weave elements of sympathy and urgency into their narratives. They might speak of personal suffering, persecution, or the dire situation of their family, appealing to the victim's empathy. The urgent need for the funds creates a pressure to act quickly before the opportunity is lost, or before too much critical thought can be applied. This manufactured haste is a classic tactic in many forms of confidence tricks, designed to bypass careful consideration. Another subtle psychological hook is the feeling of being chosen, of being part of a select, secret opportunity. The victim is often made to feel special, entrusted with a sensitive and highly confidential matter. This sense of exclusivity can be flattering and can foster a conspiratorial bond between the scammer and the victim, making the latter more compliant and less likely to seek outside advice which might expose the fraud. The request for secrecy is paramount to the scam's success. The seemingly obvious errors in grammar or spelling, often a subject of mockery, are sometimes even thought to be a deliberate filtering mechanism. Scammers may not be interested in wasting their time on individuals who are too discerning or skeptical. By crafting messages that might immediately repel the more astute, they effectively self-select for more gullible or perhaps more desperate respondents, those willing to suspend disbelief in pursuit of the promised reward. The evolution into the digital age has given this age-old scam an unprecedented reach. Email, social media, and messaging apps allow fraudsters to send out millions of solicitations at virtually no cost, blanketing the globe with their improbable tales. Even if only a minuscule percentage of recipients respond, the sheer volume can make the endeavor profitable for the perpetrators. The anonymity afforded by the internet also makes it harder to trace and apprehend these scammers. While Nigeria became prominently associated with this type of fraud in the late 20th century, particularly during its oil boom and subsequent economic difficulties, advance fee scams originate from many countries. The Nigerian prince label has stuck, but the methodology is global. Scammers are adept at tailoring their narratives to current events or exploiting the perceived instability or corruption in various regions to make their stories sound more plausible to their intended audience. The victims of these scams are not always a homogeneous group. While there's a stereotype of the naive or elderly victim, people from all walks of life, educational backgrounds, and age groups have fallen prey. The common denominator is often a particular vulnerability at a specific point in time, perhaps financial desperation, loneliness, or simply a momentary lapse in judgment fueled by a powerful emotional appeal. The desire for a quick fix to life's problems can be a potent lure. Despite widespread public awareness campaigns and countless media reports, advance fee fraud continues to claim victims and cause significant financial and emotional devastation. The persistence of the scam is a testament to its cunning psychological architecture and the enduring aspects of human nature it exploits: hope, greed, sympathy, and the occasional powerful desire to believe in something that seems too good to be true. Law enforcement agencies around the world actively work to combat these scams, but the cross-jurisdictional nature of the internet makes it a challenging fight. Education and public awareness remain crucial tools in preventing victimization. Understanding the mechanics of the scam, recognizing the red flags, and cultivating a healthy skepticism towards unsolicited offers of vast wealth are key defenses. The legacy of the Spanish prisoner lives on in these digital missives, a quiet, persistent hum in the background of our online lives. It's a reminder that while technology evolves at a dizzying pace, some fundamental human vulnerabilities remain remarkably constant. The promise of something for almost nothing has always been, and likely always will be, a powerful tool in the con artist's arsenal. These scams are not victimless crimes. Beyond the financial losses, which can be life-altering, victims often experience profound feelings of shame, embarrassment, and emotional distress. The betrayal of trust can have long-lasting psychological impacts. The quiet horror for many is not just the loss of money, but the realization of their own susceptibility. So as these thoughts of digital deception and human gullibility gently swirl, let them also serve as a soft reminder of the importance of caution and discernment in a world full of promises, both real and illusory. The enduring nature of this scam, its simple structure masked by ever-changing narratives, tells us much about the timeless art of the con. May the understanding of this persistent fraud, its roots in the past and its continued presence in our modern age, bring a sense of quiet knowledge. Allow the recognition of these patterns to fade into the background, replaced by the tranquility of your restful space as you drift effortlessly toward sleep. And so, dear listeners, our journey through the shadowed corridors of history's grand deceptions draws to a gentle close. We've wandered through tales of audacious ambition and heartbreaking betrayal, from phantom nations sold with flourish to revolutionary technologies that promised miracles but delivered only mirages. We've seen national monuments bartered like trinkets and financial titans built on foundations of pure fiction. Each story, a somber note in the long, often dull, symphony of human experience. As we reflect on these accounts, from the dusty outback of Australia with its emu war bonds to the polished allure of Silicon Valley's fallen stars, a common thread emerges. It's a thread woven not just with the intricate cunning of the fraudsters, but with the very fabric of our own human desires. The yearning for wealth, for health, for a shortcut to ease, or simply for a sense of belonging to something special. These are the vulnerabilities that con artists throughout the ages have so expertly learned to exploit. Consider the sheer audacity of selling a non-existent country like Poyais, or the meticulous, decades-long cultivation of trust in the case of Bernie Madoff. Think of the charming rogue who sold the Eiffel Tower not once, but twice, or the young man who effortlessly slipped into multiple professional personas before his 21st birthday. These are not just isolated incidents of clever trickery, they are reflections of a persistent human drama, a dance between deception and desire. The details may change with time, from handwritten letters promising Spanish treasure to slick emails from supposed Nigerian princes, from salted diamond fields in the Wild West to glossy prospectuses for blood-testing unicorns. Yet the core mechanics remain eerily similar. A grand promise, an illusion of exclusivity or urgency, and an appeal to that quiet, hopeful voice within us that wishes for something extraordinary, something just beyond the grasp of everyday reality. Perhaps then the biggest scam in human history isn't a single event, a particular fraudster, or a specific lost fortune. Perhaps it is the recurring pattern of our own susceptibility, the enduring human tendency to be swayed by a compelling narrative, especially when it promises to fulfill our deepest longings or alleviate our greatest fears. The eternal con plays out on the stage of our own minds, exploiting the cognitive biases and emotional triggers that make us, well, human. It's a humbling thought, but not one intended to leave you in unease. Rather, it's a gentle reminder, a soft whisper from the annals of dull history. Awareness, after all, is a quiet shield. Understanding these patterns, recognizing the timeless allure of the too good to be true, can help us navigate a world where new schemes are undoubtedly already being conceived in the fertile imaginations of modern-day charlatans. So, as you drift now towards the peaceful shores of sleep, carry with you that simple, age-old wisdom. If it sounds too good to be true, it probably is. May your investments, whether of finance or of faith, always prove sound. May your trust be well placed, and your path be illuminated by a gentle skepticism that guards rather than hardens your heart. Thank you for joining us on this exploration of history's biggest scams. May your dreams tonight be serene, untroubled by fast-talking swindlers or the hollow echo of empty promises. Rest well and sleep soundly.